My name is Brown. Moses Brown. Oh, golly, I don't think you've ever heard of me. Well, some of you may have. My brother, they named a college after him. Well, a university. A Brown University. Well, we're from a family of industrialists. Well, some of the first industrialists here in America. And that's what we're going to be talking about, the Industrial Revolution starting right here in the Americas. Well, an industrial revolution is where you started off with just hand tools and then you moved to something larger, big machinery to do the work of all those little hand tools. Well, it was in the Brown family that we got started off using hand tools and in making things in little factories, and that's how this whole thing started rolling. But you know, there's several things you've got to do in order for an industrial revolution to happen in your country. Some countries are ready for it and other countries aren't. In fact, the very first thing you need to have is a stable government. Well, you've got to have a stable government, because if you don't have a stable government, you're going to have revolutions, and you're going to have civil wars, and you're going to have all kinds of problems that aren't going to allow the business people time to get things rolling, because it's the business people that are going to create this revolution. Now, not some big army or dictator. It's got to be the businessmen who get together and will put this together. So you've got to have a stable government. Well, you've got to have other things too. There's four to be exact. A stable government, and you've got to have a stable economy. Well, of course, having the stable government helps make the stable economy, but you've got to have a banking system. You've got to have a place where you can go to get capital, to get money so that you can buy land, so that you can build the buildings that are going to house it, to pay for the machinery. You've got to have capital to get things rolling. You've got to have a good banking system. You've got to have a country that is strong enough so it's got good powers of economics, so people will lend them money so that they can have money in banks. All of them absolutely necessary. And the third thing you've got to have after a stable government and then a stable economy, you've got to have the manpower. You've got to have the people that are going to work in the factories, and the factories are going to necessitate towns and cities growing. And so you're going to want to have people to come there. Well, now we got a kind of a problem. Some places, there just aren't enough people. They're busy working all on their own farms, and there's nobody wants to work for wages. But then you got to have something else. Aside from the manpower, you've got to have natural resources. I mean, natural resources are absolutely essential. Otherwise, you got to ship things in from faraway places, and that takes your cost way up, and that'll put you way behind in an industrial revolution. Natural resources, probably number one would be lumber. You've got to have trees growing abundantly around so that you can chop them down, so you can mill them, so you can make them into lumber, so you can build your factories. What else do you need? You need iron. You got to have iron, because eventually machines are going to be made out of these big chunky iron things with big gears going around, and you're going to absolutely have to have some iron. Later on, you're going to need coal, because they're going to need coal to fire the furnaces. They'll take the place of wood, and they will power the machinery that will make all this stuff go. Another thing you never think about, or at least most people don't think about, you got to have water. Now, I don't mean living in a desert type, got to have water. What I'm talking about is you got to have water power, streams that can turn great big wheels around and around and around, so that they can tie those into other machines that will run inside the factory. And water for rivers, big rivers, so the big boats can go on, so that they can carry your product down the river, down to the seaport. And when you get to the seaport, to distribute it all the way around the world. Now, you've got to have those things, those four things, before you're going to have an industrial revolution. And Britain, Great Britain, why, they had it all. They had it all, and that's why the Industrial Revolution started there. But you know what? America had all those things too, only it came a little bit later, our Industrial Revolution, than theirs. Our economy here in America was based on agriculture. We had a huge growing economy based on agriculture. Why, in 1790, there were 9 out of 10 people were farmers. Farmers everywhere. That's what we were. We were a nation of farmers, and that's exactly what Jefferson called us. He wanted us to be a nation of farmers, and he was opposed to factories, Jefferson was, because they had cities, and where you have cities, you've got slums, and where you've got slums, you've got poor people and contrasting with rich people, and you're going to have fighting, and well, it's just everybody is all so much happier if everybody's got a plot of land to work on, and everybody's middle class or rich, and everybody's going to be happy. Even on the frontier, people can get land, and they can grow and fulfill the American dream and own something that will grow into something they can pass on to their children. But there were two versions of what was best for America. Hamilton, he wasn't in for this whole thing with all the farmers. No, sirree. He wanted a diverse economy. What that means is you just don't rely upon agriculture. You got to have other things. You got to have manufacturing. And that's exactly what he wanted, a diverse economy. Well, do you know why he wanted a diverse economy? It was quite simple. It was the war. The Revolutionary War showed us we had to have a diverse economy. When Britain stopped shipping things in because we were at war with them, what do you suppose happened? Local businesses had to start manufacturing the things that they couldn't get from Europe any longer. And therefore, Hamilton decided we've got to have a diverse economy. He wanted to help businesses to grow so factories could grow, so that our economy could diversify. Well, this problem with diversification and factories and versus farmers was a big political thing, but it's going to be solved eventually. The war is going to end. The Revolutionary War, that is. And then something strange is going to happen. Britain's going to try to reclaim its markets. Well, after all, we were their #1 trading partner, and we were theirs, and so they start coming back in, and they begin what is called dumping. Dumping. Now, let me explain that to you. They manufacture, hats, or iron, or anything, and they manufacture it cheaply and well because they've got qualified, skilled people in England, but they sell it at cost, or even slightly below cost, so that they can take over the market in faraway America and reclaim what was once theirs market share-wise. So, what can the Americans do? Suddenly they've got hats and iron and manufactured goods coming in that they cannot compete with. It's just too cheap. They can't make a hat that cheap. And these guys are shipping it across because they're dumping. They're willing to take the loss now to gain a market share later. Well, under the Articles of Confederation, immediately after the war, there was nothing we could do. We couldn't pass a tariff, a tax on these goods coming in to prevent them from overpowering our manufacturers. So we were in a world of hurt. A world of hurt. And that's why we needed a new Constitution, and that's why we got one that allowed us to have tariffs that would stop the British from dumping their products and reducing our ability to manufacture on our own. Now, if you were wise, a wise man would invest in factories. A wise man would invest in manufacturing. Why, you ask? Quite simple. We had the Revolutionary War. We had the Embargo Act. We had the War of 1812, all of which stopped all this manufactured goods coming in from Europe. If you were smart, you invested in a factory, and then you began to pump it out to all those people who missed all those goods from Europe. This was the wise and prudent thing to do. And this is exactly what happened. But after the War of 1812, what does Britain do again? They start dumping all over again. But this time we put up tariffs. We stop them by taxing them by 20, by 30%. The Bank of the United States, its charter is going to expire. It expires in 1811. But we're going to recharter it and make the second bank of the United States. Why do we need this bank? Remember rule number 2, you've got to have a stable economy. You've got to have banking systems that exist so people can get money. So they rechartered the bank. And along comes a guy that's going to help in 2 different areas. The guy's name is Eli Whitney. He's from Massachusetts. He's a Yale graduate. He goes to Georgia to be a tutor. You know, there's not a lot of money in teaching. And he finds out that real quick. And he scratches his head. And he writes a letter to his dad and says, I've decided I'm going to have to invent something to make us some money. Now, in the West Indies, they invented a machine called a cotton gin that stripped the fibers away from the seeds of cotton, thereby making cotton fabric out of the cotton and throwing the seeds away. But American cotton, oh boy, that was an entirely different thing. American cotton had seeds that were much more slippery. The cotton gin that was invented in the West Indies, you'd crank that thing and it just wouldn't separate the seeds. So what are you going to do? He invents a new type of cotton gin. Now, this cotton gin will allow one man to do the work of 50. Eli Whitney is not going to get rich with this because, you see, people copy it. He tries to copyright it, but there's too many different variables to it. But pretty soon, cotton gins spring up all over the South. And pretty soon, cotton production is going to increase. But remember that scare we had with the French when we thought we were going to go to war with them? Well, Washington decides they need muskets, guns, very badly. So what's going to happen? Eli Whitney goes to them and says, I can supply you with 10,000 guns. They're shocked because the Springfield Armory, which had been producing guns for them, they were producing much, much less per year than what Eli Whitney promised he could do. But Eli Whitney was a sly man because what you see is he didn't have the factories to produce them. What he did have was an idea. And the idea was interchangeable parts. What that means is you take a musket apart, and you have another musket made exactly like it. You can take a part from the other musket and place it immediately into your musket. It will fit perfectly, operate perfectly. Now, before this time, interchangeable parts were not made for muskets. What you would do, you'd go to a man who made muskets, and he would make you a custom-made musket just for you. The trigger, the housing around it, the hammer itself, all of those things, every single part was custom-made. You couldn't take it from another musket and stick it on yours. It just wouldn't fit. You'd have to take it back to the original gunsmith, and he would make a new one for you. Interchangeable parts was not Eli Whitney's idea originally. He just borrowed other ideas and put it together. But the government was so happy with it, they awarded him the contract, gave him $5,000 in advance, and suddenly he's off to the races making muskets. Well, as it is often with military contracts, it goes a little longer than they anticipated. Didn't quite make them in time. But there's the great demonstration in which Adams and Jefferson are invited, and he's got 10 muskets, all spread apart. And he begins to take them and put together the muskets. Well, this was absolutely unknown before. And it was a great demonstration. Jefferson was incredibly pleased with the fact that interchangeable parts were working, and they award him an extension on the contract, give him $30,000 more in advance, and he becomes a wealthy man. Well, that's interchangeable parts. The Industrial Revolution is going to make a shift from hand tools to power machinery. And it begins in what is called the textile industry. That's clothing, cloth, textiles. Well, in the 1700s, it's going to happen. And there's a man who was a weaver and a carpenter by the name of James Hargreaves in England. And he's going to invent something called the spinning jenny, sort of a mechanical spinning wheel. Now, this spinning jenny, they don't know how it got its name. Spinning, we can understand, but jenny, they thought maybe it was named after his wife. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was short for engine, enginey. Maybe it was a spinning engine. Well, regardless where the name came from, it was a smashing success. And pretty soon, this man's spinning jennies were in everybody's homes that were manufacturing thread, because that's what it made, was thread, and it made it so much faster than the normal process, by hand and much more slowly. Then comes along in 1785, Richard Arkwright. Now, Richard Arkwright, he is a barber, but he's also an inventor. And he puts together what is called the water frame. Now, the water frame uses water power, and it's much, much larger than the spinning jenny, and it's much more successful. And because it uses water power, it's big wheels to turn, water wheels would go around and around, the stream would run underneath them and push these water wheels, then a shaft would go through that would run these water frames. You had to locate the factory or the mill on a stream, a quick-moving river. Well, and that's how they got the name mill, by the way. You know, they had mills before that had great big windmills or water wheels, and they used to grind grain. Well, now the mill still has the big wheel that goes around, but they're not grinding grain. They're operating textile machines that were invented just for that purpose. Great Britain takes the lead in the textile industries. In fact, they've got a monopoly on it. They've absolutely got it literally sewn up, no pun intended, but nobody can compete with them. They have all the markets. They have got the most advanced machinery in the world. Everybody else is still putting it out by hand, and they have jumped into the industrial age, and they are making it by machines. Well, they've got to keep their monopoly. But how do you keep your monopoly? Well, they forbade mechanics, the men who worked on the machinery, from going to other countries. But that didn't stop enterprising young men, particularly a young man by the name of Samuel Slater. Samuel Slater, remember that name because it affects you and it affects me. Samuel Slater was one of those mechanics. He worked on those machines and he memorized the machines. Every part, every movable joint, every gear, how it fitted in with the river system and the big turning wheel. He memorized the whole thing. And he comes to America. And he meets me. He meets me, Moses Brown, and we go into business together. We'd already been doing business the Brown family had for years, and we just start making these textile machines that Slater remembered how to build, puts them all together, and pretty soon we've got a textile mill. Slater will develop mills in 4 different states. He will die a wealthy man. He has accomplished the American dream. Factories need workers, though. And remember, in America, we have a shortage of workers because everybody wants to work on their own farms. There's so much land, anybody can just go out and stake it or buy it cheaply. People don't want to work for wages, so where are you going to find these workers? Huh. Oh, what do you do? What do you do? People thought, what do we do? Well, they solved the problem in what is called the Rhode Island system. Children. They'll use children in the mills, ages 7 to 12. For as little as 33 cents a week, you can have a kid working in your factory, nice 12 to 14-hour shift. Adults, you've got to pay between $2 and $3 a week, so the kids, they're a real bargain. And by 1820, over half the people working in mills were children. Now, don't get me wrong here. Some people think, well, this is horrible stuff, but remember, at this time, children were not much of an asset. Now, poor families could literally, the whole family could work together in a factory, and everyone would get paid. The family would become wealthy. Isn't that why they came to America? Isn't that what the American dream is? Hard work and you get your dream? So children were used as well. Then a fellow by the name of Francis Cabot Lodge, a Boston man, a merchant. He goes to England in 1810. And there in England, he also memorizes machinery, comes back, forms a society called the Boston Association, and they begin to build factories as well. He doesn't like the use of children in factories. Thinks it's cruel. He especially saw them in England, how poorly and badly abused they were. He has to think of a new system, and he establishes what is called the Lowell system. Now, the Lowell system is unique. The Lowell system uses unmarried women as laborers, dormitories, or kids coming in off the farms. In the dormitories, the 6 people to a room, 3 beds per room. It's not a bad way to earn a living. And you have to remember, at this time, women did not work outside of the home. This was one of the first times that women actually could get a job, could support themselves. Then improvements start to be made. I love improvements. Your factory is going to run better because of improvements. You know, such simple things as a leather transmission belt. Big transmission belts would run, and with a transmission belt, it means your machinery could run faster on little energy. So we were going to use those. Other things are replacing the wooden gears with metal gears. It seems so elementary, but that was one of the great improvements. Made things last longer. Nails. Nails are expensive. The people on the frontier did not use nails at all in their homes. Why? They're too expensive. But we're going to cut the price by 1/3 because they're going to be stamped out by machine. This is going to be a marvelous thing. Now nails can be used in regular homes. People will be happier. Sheet iron. It is going to be turned out on huge rollers in factories. Now, before you'd get hammers and you just beat the darn things flat, beating hundreds and thousands of times. But now you've got a huge roller that will do the job. And the price is going to drop because it's cheaper to manufacture, it's faster. Homes are going to change in the 1830s and 40s. Colored patterns and flowers and tapestry-like things. A wallpaper, styles are going to be like crazy. Cloth is going to change. Paisleys and flowers are going to start popping out on people. You can see them bright colors, all because the Industrial Revolution has revolutionized the clothing industry. Wood-turning machines, mechanical machines that so you can turn wood, so you can have beautiful bedposts are going to be so much cheaper now, and the common people will be able to buy what looks like expensive furniture, but it's actually been manufactured far more cheaply because machines are turning them out. Everybody's going to be happier because of the machines. Corporations. Corporations are looked down as something corruptible. Have a bad name at this time. You use them for public works and things like that, but most people don't want to get involved with them because of this tainted element. The rich are going to get richer off of them. Cotton industry changes, of course. Eli Whitney, with his cotton gin, revolutionized everything. In 1790, 3,000 bales are produced. But by 1795, 17,000 bales. By 1801, 100,000 bales. And by 1824, 100,000 bales of cotton are produced and shipped out for sale. Education is going to revolutionize as well. Well, revolutionize everywhere except the frontier and in the South. Most kids are going to go to school, except in those two locations where the schools are not as well developed. In the South, because the rich people have private schools to go to. The planters all send their kids there. And the poor people, they don't even bother to consider about them. On the frontier, you're busy working on the farm. Kids are needed there, therefore you don't need to go to school. But schools are going to start to grow because it's going to be a necessity. Horace Mann, he's going to be a man that, he is going to be an individual that is going to help promote school boards to be established, communities taking an interest in common schools. And by 1850, there will be free education virtually everywhere except the South. And they will have elementary education. They will have teachers training schools, some public high schools and some public colleges as well, with every place except the South. Business leaders are going to encourage education. Why? They want an educated workforce. If people are educated, they'll do a better job with things. Also, they want to Americanize immigrants. We have thousands of immigrants coming over all the time, some speaking different languages, some having different customs. So what are you going to do? Educate them in a school system. Teach them standardized English. Teach them the customs. Teach them how to be Americans. And that was one of the big things that they were pushing for. And they also wanted to instill in the working class the ethics of hard work at a young age. Like the poor people weren't working hard enough anyway. Education is the great equalizer. But not just education. Books are being produced far cheaper. With these huge paper mills, we can make paper cheaper. With these huge printing machines, we can print books faster. The prices drop. More people get to read. The first penny newspaper is actually sold. 1 penny for a newspaper. It was the New York Sun in 1833. Lyceums, lecture series, improvement associations are going to be established. The first one's in Massachusetts in 1826. People are going to come there for self-help, to try to help their communities, to plan libraries, to plan civic projects, to come to lectures. It is going to be a time of learning is going to have a renaissance here. And then colleges. Oh, colleges. Colleges are going to bloom up everywhere. If you are a medium-sized town and you want to get some notoriety, you are going to make a college. But there were problems. Number one, no grades. The kids could goof off, it didn't matter. Once you got in, you were pretty well accepted, and teachers had a terrible time controlling the kids. And then they were studying Greek and Latin and ancient history and things that just weren't relevant. But one school is going to lead the way. One school is going to show them how to go. And you know what one school that is? I bet you can't guess. Coming from Moses Brown. That's right, Brown University. Brown University is going to lead the way, and they're going to open up classes to things that should be taught that are more relevant than Greek and Latin. Oh, the sciences, mathematics, engineering. These kinds of things are going to open up, and other colleges are going to do it as well. Many of these other colleges will fold because there are just too many. Ohio has 25 colleges in the 1850s. The great French writer Tocqueville, when he came and visited America and wrote about it in his book, he talked about America dealing with science, and he said, few civilized nations have made less progress than the United States in the higher sciences. In other words, we were lagging the rest of the world in science. The truth of the matter was, most of our scientists were only part-time scientists. They weren't bankrolled well enough to make great progress like places elsewhere. Well, one person that did stand out was Maria Mitchell, who received a gold medal in Europe for her discoveries in astronomy. Then there's the medical revolution. Oh, the medical revolution. In 1809, Dr. Ephraim McDowell, he is going to remove an ovarian tumor from a woman who thought she was pregnant. Now, in these days, they did not operate with anesthesia. Everyone thought he was going to end up killing her. In fact, there was a mob outside the house as he was operating, waiting to lynch him if it wasn't successful. It was successful. The woman recovered, lived another 32 years. Another surgeon in 1822, Army surgeon, William Beaumont in New York, a hunter, a woodsman comes to him. He's been shot in the chest by accident, and his lung and his stomach are exposed. He doesn't think the boy will live, but he sews him back together, and he notices that there's a flap of skin that begins to grow over his stomach, and there's a hole that you can see right through the stomach. And so this intrepid surgeon experiments. No one knows how the gastric system works. He takes bits of food on string and drops them in, pulls them out over a couple of hours and takes a look at them and writes them in a journal. It is the first time in the history of medicine that people were able to figure out how the stomach worked using the chemicals and acids to dissolve the food. They had theories that they had baked and cooked and rattled around, all kinds of things, but he set them straight. Other things were to come into play. For example, surgery always done without anesthesia. If you were a good surgeon, it depended on how fast you were in cutting that off. Operating rooms were up in the tallest rooms and in the tallest towers, so the screams of the victims or the patients could not be heard. It's because no anesthesia was available. Opium or alcohol was used to deaden the pain, but nothing very good. And finally, nitrous oxide is invented in 1772, but they didn't use it for operations. You know what they used it for? Parties. They would invite somebody over with nitrous oxide and everybody would inhale and they'd all get high. This was the thing that they did for entertainment. Oh, it got on the lecture circuit too. Samuel Colt later invented the Colt pistol. Oh, he's one of the fellows as well. He is going to be going around touring as a doctor, Amherst dropout, but he is going to be touring as a doctor and doing demonstrations with this nitrous oxide laughing gas. It won't be until 1842 when Dr. Crawford Long operates and removes a tumor with someone under this anesthesia that they see it works. But he is so afraid that people will find out that he used this anesthesia, he doesn't publish it at all. It isn't until later when Dr. Horace Wells takes this new anesthesia, it's been around for a while, and goes to Massachusetts General Hospital, and there at Massachusetts General Hospital, he operates, and the patient groans. Oh, and he is the laughing stock. Everybody thinks the man's in pain. The man couldn't remember a thing about pain, but still, it wasn't until 1846 that another doctor, Dr. William Morton, there at Massachusetts General once again, has the first successful operation under anesthesia that is recorded and documented, removes a tumor, and later on another patient removes a leg. Anesthesia is now being used widely throughout the world. In fact, Queen Victoria, when she delivers her next baby, will actually have it delivered using anesthesia. Well, Dr. Morton, he later is going to die, this poor gentleman, trying to prove that this was his invention. He'll die because he has an apoplectic fit and falls over dead. Dr. Wells, who was the fellow who operated on the fellow that was groaning, that got laughed out of Massachusetts General, he will become addicted to chloroform and commits suicide and dies. Dr. Long, who was too afraid to publish his results, he will die while on a house call of old age. But there's revolutions all over. We have taken revolutions from the very top with the Industrial Revolutions, followed through with revolutions in science, revolutions in medicine, revolutions in education, all to make America a more exciting, happier, and better place for the people.